All right, so thank you everybody for being here. Today we're talking about influencer partnerships, but not in the way you usually hear about them. So most dealerships are experimenting with influencers, but what they're getting back is inconsistent. So a few posts, some engagement, but no real impact on leads or sales. And what I want to show you today is how to approach this differently, how to turn influencer partnerships into something that actually drives visibility, builds trust, and creates long-term marketing assets for your dealership. And as Anita already shared, everything that I'm sharing comes from real dealership experience. So over 20 years inside of operations and marketing, and now working with dealers across North America on lead gen and follow-up systems. So this is going to be very practical. The goal is for you to walk away with a clear framework that you can actually use and not just ideas. And again, my name is Lynn. Excuse me, I'm a fractional CMO and marketing strategist based in Charleston, South Carolina. I've spent over 20 years inside a family-owned boat and RV dealership, working across sales, operations, and marketing. So everything that I do talk about comes from actually being in a dealership, not just from the outside looking in. And today I help dealerships build marketing systems that generate consistent leads and improve follow-up without relying on third-party marketplaces. And that last part is important because a lot of what we're seeing right now, even with influencer marketing, is still very dependent on platforms that we don't control. And so what I focus on is helping dealers take those efforts and turn them into something more predictable and more measurable. And just quickly, this is my family. They're a big part of what I do and how I think about building a business that actually works long-term. So before I get into strategy, a little more context on where this comes from. I spent over 20 years inside a family-owned boat and RV dealership, not just marketing, but sales, operations, inventory, events, really seeing how everything connects. And during that time, we tested a lot. Some things worked, a lot didn't. We tried different advertising channels, different promotions, different partnerships, and including influencer style collaborations before that was really even a term. And what we started to see over time was a pattern. It wasn't necessarily about doing more marketing. It was about understanding what actually drives attention, and more importantly, what turns that attention into action, and then optimizing around that. And that's what really led into the framework that I'm going to walk you through today. Because influencer partnerships can work, but only when they're built on what already works inside of a dealership. And just to round out the background, this is where a lot of the structure behind what I do comes from. So being the 2020 RVDA scholarship recipient for the NCM Associates Fader Leadership Development Program, focused on the operational and financial side of running a dealership. And that gave me a much deeper understanding of how marketing actually ties into profitability, not just activity or an expense. I'm also a certified digital marketing professional, so I've spent a lot of time studying what works across industries, not just inside RV dealers. And so the reason I share this isn't just for credentials, it's to show you that what we're going to be talking about today sits at the intersection of both dealership operations and modern digital marketing. Because where most dealerships are struggling right now, especially with things like influencer partnerships, is that those two pieces aren't connected. So you might have marketing happening, but it's not tied into a system that actually supports sales, follow-up, or long-term ROI. And that's the gap we're going to address as we move forward. So before we get into the strategy, I want to acknowledge what's already happening in the industry. So you're seeing influencer style content everywhere right now, and that's through publications, social media platforms, and media partnerships. So there's a big push towards storytelling, lifestyle content, and getting products in front of real people. And that's a good thing. The industry is recognizing that traditional advertising alone isn't enough anymore. And buyers want to see how these products actually fit into someone's life. But here's the challenge. A lot of this exposure is happening at the industry level and not always at the dealership level in a way that directly drives leads or sales. Dealerships are starting to participate, but in many cases, it's still fragmented. So you might get a feature, a post, or a collaboration, but there's no clear strategy behind how it connects back to your business. And that's where the opportunity is. Because when you take the same concept and you apply it with intention at the dealership level, that's where it starts to become a real growth channel. So let's just do a quick check-in, and you can post your answers in the chat. But who here has worked with an influencer before? And now here's the more important question. If you've done it before, did you actually see a measurable ROI from it? And I'm not just talking about likes or comments, but leads, appointments, or sales. Because a lot of dealerships have tried it, but very few can clearly tie it back to results. And that's not because influencer marketing doesn't work. It's because it's usually missing structure. And what we're going to go through today is how to fix that. So if you do invest time or money into this, it actually turns into something measurable and repeatable. So let's define what we actually mean by an influencer, because this is where a lot of dealerships get it wrong. So when people hear influencer, they typically think of celebrities or people with massive followings. And that's not necessarily what we're talking about. An influencer is someone who simply shapes the buyer's decisions through content or trust. And that could be someone with 20,000 followers or someone with as few as 200, as long as their audience listens to them. And for dealerships, the best opportunities are usually much closer to home. So micro creators tend to perform better because their audiences are more engaged and more relevant. They're also more cost effective, and they're much easier to work with when it comes to content usage. So your own customers can be incredibly powerful here. Someone doing a walkthrough of their unit, sharing their upgrade story, that's real relatable content that builds trust very quickly. Your sales team and technicians can also be influencers. They already have authority, and when they create content around the inventory or how things work, it removes friction in the buying process. And then you have local communities like campgrounds, RV clubs, and people documenting trips. That lifestyle content is what helps potential buyers picture themselves in the product. So the key takeaway here is this. You don't need bigger influencers. You need more relevant ones and a better way to use what they create. So here's what I want you to walk away with today. First, a smarter way to approach influencer partnerships, one that actually tied to ROI and not just visibility. Second, a repeatable framework that you can use, not something that you just try once, but something that you can build into your ongoing marketing. And I'm also going to give you some really practical pieces, things like outreach messaging that you can start to use with these partnerships without overthinking things. And so we'll talk through how to structure campaigns. So you're not just getting a post, you're getting content that you can reuse across your ads, social media, and email. And I'll show you a real world example from a dealership so you can see how this actually plays out. So the goal here is simple. By the end of this, you should feel confident, not just trying influencer marketing, but doing it in a way that actually produces results. So why does this actually work? At a high level, it just comes down to trust. Consumers trust other people far more than they trust brands. And that's especially true when you're talking about a high ticket purchase like an RV. People don't just want specs, they want validation. They want to see someone else using it, experiencing it, and talking about it in a way that feels real. And that's where social proof comes in. So when someone sees a real person walking through a unit, sharing their experience, or documenting a trip, that carries more weight than a polished ad. And RV buying is emotional. Yes, there's the logic involved, but the decision is driven by lifestyle. It's about freedom, travel, family experiences. Influencers naturally tell those stories. So when you combine a product that's emotional with a format that's built around storytelling, it's a really strong fit. And this is important. Just because it works in theory, it does not mean it works automatically. So without structure, it stays at the level of attention, not conversion. And that's the piece that most dealerships are missing. So if this works, why does it fail for most dealerships? And there are a few common patterns. First, choosing influencers based on their follower count instead of relevance. Just because someone has a large audience, that doesn't mean that audience is local, qualified, or even in the market. Second, there's usually no plan for what happens after the content is created. The post goes up and maybe it gets some engagement and then it disappears. So there's no system to reuse that content in ads, email, or anywhere else it would continue working. And then third, there's no real tracking. So no way to tie back that effort to leads, appointments, or sales. So it's hard to justify doing it again. So it ends up feeling like a one-off experiment instead of a repeatable strategy. But the good news is that none of these are complicated problems. They're just missing structure. And once you put the right framework around this, everything starts to work differently. So if those are the common mistakes, let's shift into what you should actually do instead. And so what I'm going to walk you through next is a simple, repeatable way to run an influencer campaign from start to finish. And this isn't complicated, but it does need to be intentional. And because the difference between something that gets attention and something that drives ROI is structure. And these 7 steps are the framework. So if you follow this, you'll start to see a shift from one-off posts to something that actually supports your overall marketing and sales process. And as we go through this, I want you to think about your current marketing. So where could this plug in? Where are you already creating content or running campaigns that this could enhance? Because this isn't about adding more, it's about making what you're already doing work better. So let's start with step 1. Step 1 is where most campaigns go wrong, and it's the simplest fix. You have to start with clear goals. And before you even think about who you're partnering with or what content you're creating, you need to know what success looks like. So are you trying to build awareness, drive engagement, or generate actual leads and appointments? Because each of those requires a different approach. And from there, pick 1 or 2 key performance indicators to track. Not 10, just 1 or 2 that actually matter. And that could be clicks, form submissions, phone calls, or booked appointments. Something that you can tie back to real activity, not just vanity metrics. And then make sure that the campaign actually matches your audience and your brand. If the content doesn't feel aligned, it will not convert, no matter how many people see it. And so this is really the foundation, because if you don't define success up front, you end up chasing likes instead of leads. And the dealerships that see real results with this are very clear on one thing. Every campaign is tied back to revenue or appointments in some way. So once your goal is clear, The next step is choosing the right type of campaign because not every influencer campaign should look the same. So if your goal is visibility, then sponsored content makes sense. You're getting your brand in front of new audiences. If you're trying to drive engagement, things like giveaways or event promotions tend to perform well. They give people a reason to interact. And if you want something more measurable, that's where referral links or affiliate style offers come in. So now you can actually track activity back to that campaign. And one of the most underutilized options for dealerships is customer-driven content. Customer spotlights, lot tours, real ownership stories. Those build trust faster than almost anything. So the key here is alignment. The campaign type should match the goal you set in step one, because if those two things don't line up, you end up with activity, but not results. And this is where you start to see a shift. So instead of just trying influencer marketing, you're designing campaigns with a specific outcome in mind. Now that you know your goal and your campaign type, step 3 is finding the right people. This is where most dealerships default to a follower count, but what really matters is relevance. So you want creators whose audience actually matches your buyer. A simple place to start is just searching hashtags, things like RV life, RV community, local travel content. You'll start to see who's consistently creating in that space. There are also paid tools that you can use, but honestly, a lot of great partnerships come from just doing local manual searches. And when you're evaluating someone, look at 3 things. Is their audience aligned with your market? Are people actually engaging with their content? And does their style feel natural for your brand? And then comes outreach. And this is really important because you need to lead with value. So that could be cash, a service exchange, access to a unit or an experience. The best partnerships don't feel transactional. They feel like a good fit on both sides. And if you're just getting started, focus on micro creators, smaller audiences, but more engaged and much easier to build relationships with. And this is where things start to shift a bit. So you're not just hiring influencers, you're building a network of people who can consistently create content for your dealership over time. And step 4 is where you turn a good idea into something structured. So once you've identified the right partner, you need to set clear expectations up front. This starts with a simple brief. So what are they creating? When is it going live? Where is it being posted? And how is it being used? You don't need anything overly complicated, but you do need clarity. And then align on your deliverables. So how many pieces of content? What format? The timeline, and whether there's any reviews or approvals process. One of the biggest things that we see missed here is usage rights. If you're investing in this content, you want the ability to reuse it in your ads, on your website, in email, and that should be agreed on from the beginning. So even if it's a small collaboration, a service, a trade, or experience, you still want a simple agreement in place. It keeps things professional and it will protect both sides. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just a casual post. This is a partnership that should create value for your dealership beyond a single piece of content. So what we have here is an example of what that actually looks like. And I want you to notice that this isn't complicated. It's clear, structured, and easy for the creator to follow. So you're setting the tone, you're outlining expectations and giving direction without scripting everything for them. So you'll see a few key pieces in here, that there's a clear theme for the campaign so they know what story they're telling. There are content directions like customer experience, education, lifestyle. So you're guiding what gets created, but you're still giving them the creative freedom because that's where the authenticity comes from. So there are also technical details like where to upload the content, how to tag your dealership, and how communication happens. And this is what turns a collaboration into something consistent. Because without this, every creator does something different and it's hard to reuse or build on. And with this, you can start creating content that actually fits into a bigger marketing system. And that's really where the shift happens. You're not just getting content, you're building assets that you can use across your marketing long after this post goes live. And step 5 is where the content actually gets created. So this is where you want to shift your mindset just a little bit. You're not asking someone to create an ad. You're asking them to tell a story. And the best performing content in this space, it's not going to feel like a commercial. It's going to feel like a real experience. So instead of focusing on specs and features, focus on what it's like to actually use the product. What does delivery day feel like? What does a weekend trip look like? What problems does it solve for that person? And you'll also want to avoid over scripting. If it feels too polished or too controlled, it loses the trust factor that makes this work in the first place. So give direction, but let them bring their own voice to it. And you can support this by giving ideas. Things like behind the scenes content, customer interviews, lot walkthroughs, a day in the lifestyle video. That helps guide the outcome without forcing it. And depending on your process, you can review content before it goes live, but try not to over edit it. Because again, the value here is authenticity. And at the end of the day, the content that performs the best is the content that feels real, not like an ad, but something your customer can actually see themselves in. So step 6 is where most of the ROI actually comes from. And this is the piece almost everyone skips. The content gets created, it gets posted once, and then it's done. But that's not where the real value is. The value is in what you do with that content after the fact. You want to take those influencer clips and reuse them everywhere. So places like your social pages, your website, your email campaigns, and even text follow-up. Now that content isn't just one post, it's supporting your entire marketing system. And this is where paid ads comes in. So instead of creating ads from scratch, you're using real content from real people, and that typically performs better. So you can retarget website visitors, drive traffic back to inventory, and actually capture leads. And don't forget to tag the influencer when you share it. That extends the reach and keeps the partnership active. So the influencer creates one piece of content, and this is the shift. But you turn it into multiple assets that keep working over time. And this is where it stops being a one-time effort and it starts becoming a real marketing channel. So step 7 is where this becomes repeatable. So you have to measure what's actually happening. So go back to the key performance indicators that you defined in step 1. So things like impressions, clicks, leads, appointments, and track those consistently. This is where simple tools will make a really big difference. So using tracked links or CRM tags allows you to see where your leads are coming from and which campaigns are actually driving results. You'll also want to look at performance by influencer. Not all of them will perform the same, and that's okay. The goal is to identify who's actually driving your engagement, traffic, or leads, and then double down on those partnerships. And this is how you move from one-off collaborations to long-term relationships. The dealerships that get the most out of this treat it like any other marketing channel. They'll track it, they optimize it, and then they reinvest in what's working. Because at the end of the day, you can't improve what you're not measuring. And when you do this right, you're going to start to you're going to start to build a small group of creators who consistently contribute to your pipeline, not just your visibility. So now that you've seen the full process, let's take a look at what this actually looks like in the real world, because this is where it really starts to click. This isn't theory. This is a real example of how the exact steps were applied at a local dealer. And what I want you to pay attention to as we go through this is how everything connects. So the creator, the content, and what happens after the content is published, because that's where most of the difference is. It's not just that the content was created, but it's how it was used. And as you watch this, think about your own dealership. Where could something like this fit into your current marketing? Because chances are the opportunity is already there. You just need the structure behind it. So let's take a look. And now this video is a long form YouTube video that I have posted in the resources that you'll get the opportunity to download at the end of this. So let me break this down for you. This was a customer created blog by the Golden Life Travelers, Thomas and Denise. Not a massive influencer. They actually just started their page, and not a big production. So just real customers documenting their experience. And in this case, the dealership traded a simple service. They just exchanged an oil change in exchange for full content rights. And that's important because this didn't require a big budget. It required the right partnership and clear expectations. So from there, that one piece of content turned into a 6-week campaign. And this is where the real value came in. It wasn't just posted once and forgotten. It was repurposed across organic social media, email, and text follow-up, and even in paid ads. So now that one video is working in multiple places, reaching different audiences at different stages of the buying process. And this is the shift that I want you to see. It's not about the influencer. It's about what you do with the content after it's created. And that's what turns something small into something that actually drives real results. So let me show you how simple this actually was. It wasn't a complicated campaign. It started with a single outreach message, just reaching out and starting the conversation. And from there, a short discovery call, nothing formal, just aligning on expectations, what content could look like, and how it would be used. And then a clear agreement, what was being exchanged, what content would be delivered, and making sure usage rights were included. And then finally, a rollout plan. So how that content would be used across channels, not just posted once, but built into a campaign. And that's it. One email, one short call, one agreement. And we turned that into 6 weeks of content that drove engagement, it built trust, and it supported lead generation. And this is the part that I really want to emphasize, is that this is repeatable. You don't need a big team or a complicated system to start. You just need a simple process and consistency in how you apply it. So let's take a look at what content was actually used. And this is where things really start to scale. So from one long form video, we pulled out 6 short form videos. Each one focused on a different angle of the story. So things like a lot tour, their upgrade story, why they chose that unit, the first walkthrough, the moving day, and then a reflection after the experience. So now instead of one piece of content, you have multiple touch points, and each one can speak to a different stage of the buyer's journey. So some people are just starting to explore, others are comparing, others are ready to take action. And then we distributed that content across multiple channels. So places like organic social media, email and text follow-up, even paid ads and Google business profile. And this is where it gets really interesting. The same content was also used in outbound follow-up, including AI-driven calls that connected directly to the sales team. So now your marketing content is supporting sales conversations. And this is the bigger picture that I want you to see. The content doesn't just live on social, it becomes part of your entire lead generation and follow-up system. And that's how you turn one piece of content into something that actually drives results across the business. And so let's talk about results from this campaign. This is from the long form YouTube video. Now, this is what we call evergreen content because it still lives on YouTube. It's still generating views as we speak. And this is important because long form content, it tends to drive longer term value. So it has over 21,000 views with strong engagement, with comments, and more important, actual leads. So there were direct phone calls coming from the link in the description, and at least one confirmed sale from this content, and it's still generating traffic. So that's a big difference from most paid ads, which stop working the moment you stop spending. And this continues to build over time. So this is the key takeaway. One customer story turned into multiple types of content, and that content produced real leads and sales, not just engagement. And this is where you start to see the bigger opportunity, because when you combine the right creator, the right structure, and the right follow-up, this becomes a consistent source of inbound interest, not just a one-off campaign. So now let's take a look at how this performed on social, specifically Facebook. One of the biggest takeaways here is the difference between Reels and static posts. The Reels consistently drove more reach and more engagement, and that makes sense because typically video, especially short form, is what the platform is prioritizing right now. But more importantly, it wasn't just the video, it was story-driven video. So content that felt real, conversational, and experience-based performed way better than polished graphics or promotional posts. And that's a big shift from how a lot of dealerships are still posting. The other thing to notice is variety. We weren't relying on one type of post. There's a mix of formats, angles, and messaging. And that keeps your page active and it gives you more opportunities to connect with different types of buyers. So the takeaway here isn't just use the video. It's use real story-driven content and use it consistently across different formats. And that's what's driving reach, engagement, and ultimately it keeps your dealership top of mind. So let's take a look at what happened when we put a little paid funds behind this. And this wasn't a big budget campaign. We kept it small and targeted test. So we used about $20 a day and we didn't even run it the full week. But even with that, the performance was strong across every key metric. So we generated 8 leads at under $9 per lead. And that's well below the typical range most dealers are seeing, which is often closer to $12 or $20 plus. The click-through rates were also significantly higher than average. And that tells us that the content itself was doing the heavy lifting. This wasn't just good targeting, it was good creative. And that's really the point here. When you start with authentic, story-driven content from a real customer, your ads, they don't feel like ads, they feel like recommendations. And that's why they convert better. So instead of constantly trying to fix your ad performance, you're focusing on improving the content going into the ads. Because when the content works, everything else gets easier and cheaper. Now let's take a look at how this translated into the text and email campaigns. So this is where a lot of dealerships leave money on the table. Instead of sending generic promotions, we use the influencer content as the core message. So every email and text pointed back to the story, the customer experience, not here's our inventory, but here's what it's actually like to buy from us. And that's a completely different angle. And you can see how the messaging stays consistent across the channels. Focus on trust, remove pressure, highlight the real customer experience, and invite them to take the next step. The video becomes the bridge. It warms people up before they ever talk to your sales team. So by the time they do click or call or walk in, they already feel like they know you. And that's why this works so well for follow-up, because now your CRM just isn't pushing offers, but it's reinforcing a story. And that's what moves people from curious to ready. And this is one of the most overlooked outcomes of campaigns like this. but it impacts your reputation. This review didn't come from an ad. It came from someone who watched the YouTube video. So think about that. A piece of content created by a real customer influenced another buyer enough to reach out, and now they're leaving a 5-star review before even completing their purchase. And that's really powerful because this is how trust scales, not just through your marketing, but through your customers validating your process for you. And this is where everything starts to connect. Influencer content builds awareness. That content feeds your ads and follow-up. People engage, they reach out and visit, and then they reinforce the experience publicly. So now your marketing is creating more marketing. And that's the real goal here. Not just leads, but momentum. Because once this flywheel starts turning, it gets easier and easier to generate trust, engagement, and sales without having to start from scratch every time. So let's zoom out and really simplify this into a repeatable framework, because this only works if you can do it consistently. So step one, you want to identify the right influencers, not the biggest, but the most relevant. People who already align with your audience and your lifestyle. Step two, you want to reach out with a clear offer. And that could be cash, trade, or experience, but it needs to feel fair and valuable. Step three, and this is critical, you want to get the raw files and usage rights. So you're not just buying a post, you're investing in content that you can use across your entire marketing system. And step four, you want to repurpose everything. So use it in your social media, your ads, your emails, your texts, your website. One piece of content should turn into multiple touch points. And finally, you want to track what actually matters, your leads and your sales, not just likes and views. Because when you follow this process, you're not guessing, you're building a system that can produce results over and over again. And before you launch anything, this is your checklist, because most campaigns don't fail from execution. They fail from poor planning up front. So first, set your clear goals. What does the success actually look like? Leads, appointments, sales, not just views. And next, you want to define your deliverables. What exactly is the creator producing? How many videos, what format, and where will it be posted? And then you want to lock in your usage agreement. And this is huge. If you don't have rights to the content, you can't fully leverage it across your ads, email, and your website. And after that, you want to set your timelines and expectations. So when is the content due? When is it going live? And what does the reviews process look like? Clarity here prevents problems later. And finally, decide how you're tracking your ROI. So UTMs, call tracking, CRM tags, whatever your system is, you need to know what's working, because when you get this part right, everything else follows, becomes easier, smoother, and way more effective. And this is where the real ROI comes from, not just creating your content, but multiplying it. So one good video shouldn't just live in one place. It should turn into 10 or more marketing assets, like short clips for Instagram Reels or YouTube Shorts, posts for your organic social, content for your email and your text campaigns, website placements like as seen on to build credibility, retargeting ads to bring people back, and even in-store displays for your showroom. This is how you stretch the value of a single piece of content across your entire marketing funnel. And most dealerships just don't do this. They post something once and then they move on. But the ones that win are the ones that they reuse, remix, and redistribute, because every additional touch point increases their chance of conversion. So the goal isn't just to create content, it's to build an asset library. And when you start thinking that way, your marketing becomes more efficient, more consistent, and a lot more profitable. So I want to leave you today with a 5-day challenge. And this is where we turn everything into action, because the goal isn't just to understand this, but it's to actually launch something. So here's a simple 5-day plan to get started. And I'm going to give you the opportunity at the end of this to download all of the resources that will help you launch this. So day one, you want to identify 3 to 5 followers, or excuse me, 3 to 5 influencers, not 50, but just a few solid, relevant creators. And on day two, you want to send your outreach. So use a simple, clear message. You don't need to overcomplicate things. Day three, you want to lock in your details, like your deliverables, your timelines, and your expectations, and make sure everyone is aligned. And then on day four, you want to get the raw files and the rights. So again, this is critical if you want to maximize the value. And on day five, edit and schedule your rollout. So start getting that content working across your marketing channels. And now, if you're wondering what kind of campaigns to run, again, these are some proven simple ideas like lot tours, customer weekend or delivery vlogs, how-tos or install videos, giveaways, even simple meet and greet events. You don't need to reinvent anything, you just need to start, because once you run your first campaign, everything gets easier from there. So let's wrap this up with some key takeaways. First, you want to start with story first content, not ads, not promotions, real world experiences from real customers. And that's what builds trust and actually gets attention. And then secondly, you want to focus on your return on investment over your reach. Views and likes are not going to pay the bills. Leads, appointments, and sales will. And third, you want to focus on micro influencers. You don't need huge audiences, you need the right audience. And finally, you don't need a big budget. You just need a smart plan and the right execution. So as a bonus, this is where you can take it to the next level. Build out the full funnel around your content. Make it easy for people to take action. Click to call numbers, tracked links, CRM tagging, dedicated landing pages. You want to track everything, because when you connect the content to your systems, that's when this becomes predictable, not just a campaign, but a repeatable growth channel.